Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
As I've shared in the past, I started my career, I was an attorney. I worked with a big firm. I left that big firm to go into private practice, and there's a whole story behind that. I won't get into that. But I was this attorney in private practice. And when you're starting out as an attorney in private practice, at least my experience, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of attorneys that get into private practice, they're trying to just find a way. Just find things to work on. And people would ask me, well, what kind of law do you want to practice? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't want to commit because I was so afraid that I would miss out on an opportunity. Ultimately, I became a business attorney, which just made the most sense. I have an MBA, I have a CPA, have a big I have a strong tax background. It just made a lot of sense. But early on, it was like, yeah, I knew I didn't want to do divorce, but geez, if that's what I had to do, then that's what I was going to do because I didn't want to fail. But ultimately became a business attorney, and I want to share about a particular client. I won't get into the details of my representation of the client because I'm not allowed to. But I had a client, and still not a client. I don't practice anymore, but still a good friend. And I remember early on meeting with him and his wife, just talking about their, the business they had and things that were going on. And like most conversations, it started out with chit chat. And just to give you some background, his wife is a doctor. A doctor at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and she's been a doctor there for years. And like most children's hospitals in this country and probably around the world, they do great work. They do great work. Mainly they're regional. Not every city. Most large cities have a children's hospital, but not every city. While every city might have a hospital, not every city has a children's hospital. And Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, is what I'll call a regional hospital, and they're bringing in kids who are suffering the worst of the worst. These are not common cold sorts of things. These are people who are fighting cancers, ailments, birth defects, all sorts of things. And so my client's wife saw the worst of the worst, working at Children's Hospital. And just kind of some context there. But so I was meeting with my client and his wife, and we were talking, and the question was, how are things going? And at that particular time, I was early on in my law practice, and I had I had taken on what I'll call pro bono work, and that's something that attorneys will do. Not all attorneys, but I was early enough in my practice of law that I didn't have a ton of clients, and I had time. And working with a client pro bono for no fee, it could certainly give you experience. It can give you exposure, and certainly can lead to other things. I'm figuring, okay, why not? I took on a pro bono client, and not all pro bono clients are created equally. Let's just put it that way. I had a pro bono client, and for this particular client, the notion of free was, hey, we're going to take this thing to the Supreme Court if we have to. I got you for free. We're just going to, and it's like, no. In other words, they weren't respectful of my time. This particular client wasn't respectful of my time. And to be honest, I can't even remember what it was about, but I just remember the angst that I felt because it was just, there was just a lot. It was just a lot. This is pre-email. This is pre-cell phone. Thank God, because I would be inundated probably with text messages and emails and, with phone calls that, they could go to voicemail, and I could, okay, when am I going to call this person back? I could limit my exposure to this particular person. So it was a handful. And I remember talking to my my good client, my paying client, and his wife, who was the doctor, about this. And just sharing, I was kind of totally flabbergasted by the whole situation. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. I can't believe this is happening, and I'm doing this work, and I'm not getting paid for it. And what I said was, I better get my reward in heaven, is what I said. And my client's wife, again, the doctor who works at Children's Hospital, seeing the worst of the worst with respect to childhood ailments, um, responded, and she said, "You're getting your reward now." And she went on to just basically, it was just a quick statement. She just basically went on to say, "You have 3 beautiful, healthy kids. You've got your reward." Um, and that really kind of, and she was nice about it. I mean, it didn't linger beyond that, other than it really hit me. It hit me that she was right. That, you know what, that's not a, that's not a, that's nothing to take lightly. Having kids who are healthy, and my kids are all grown. They're all out of the house. Very productive. Love their work. Um, in wonderful relationships and happy. Wow, yeah. I mean, I hit the jackpot. And that was the point she was trying to make. And again, she didn't belabor the point, but it certainly stuck with me that, you know what, I was doing this thing, and I was thinking, okay, at some point I'm going to get a payback for this thing. And in reality, I had received that payback, and that stuck with me. And I've thought about that over the years. Certainly, my thinking on it has changed in time. I recognized it immediately. She said it, but as I've moved along and stopped being this attorney and started being this, what I'll call a student of networking, and the notion in networking is, the mantra is, you give first and you get second. And so I've really kind of thought on this as I've gone on and had conversations with people about the notion of altruism and generosity, and contributing to the world around you. Um, I had another conversation with a couple individuals who are involved with what's now AmSpirit Business Connections, and they were looking to be franchisees. I guess I don't need to be cagey about their names. It's Joe DeMarco, who's my franchisee in Phoenix, Arizona, and a guy who works closely with him, Pat Harder. And I remember, early on, I only had one other franchisee, and they were coming up to look to see what I was doing here. Really a leap of faith to be the first franchisee, and a leap of faith to be the second. And so we spent a couple of days together. Um, and I remember Pat Harder asking me this. We're just talking about generosity and how networking works. And they had been involved in networking organizations for a while. But Pat asked me, he said, "Do you give to get, or do you get to give?" And that's kind of one of those questions that, wait a minute, I need to think about the question. What did you just ask? And he repeated it. Do you get to give, or do you give to get, or do you get to give? In other words, do you give to get? Are you giving because you're hoping for some sort of payback? And that was certainly my mindset when I was talking with my clients years earlier. Or do you get to give? Do you, you know, do you get to give? Is it a blessing to give? Is it, being, not everybody can give, which isn't entirely true, but, I was in a position where, socially, I was connected with people. I am connected with people. I have the opportunity to do things and help other people. I'm sure there are people out there that don't feel that they do. They don't feel they have the resources. They don't feel they have the connections. They don't feel they have the time. And we tell people that you need to give to get. We don't tell people that you need to get to give. And so, my response to Pat and thinking about it is, well, I get to give. What a wonderful position I'm in. And I have a business, a profession that's really dialed into helping other people. And the title of this particular episode is the number one reason to be generous. And well, I get to give. That's the number one reason. I have the ability to do it, and I want to do it. Will things come from it? Potentially. But maybe I've gotten things to begin with. Maybe I've have this life that I have, this wonderful life, and it's really a result of you know, lots of things, but me giving, my wonderful life has put me in a position to give to other people, and I have this opportunity to do so. But it got me looking into the whole notion of of generosity, and the one of the things they talk about with respect to generosity, and you have to really kind of get into the academic world on this. But they talk about the notion of generosity as or altruism as being what they term uh, a a pro-social behavior, right? It's a positive social behavior, and they look at generosity as really what they'll call the pro-social paradox. And in essence, they say it's really kind of counterintuitive if you think about it, because we as humans, we used to live in caves. We were largely nomadic. If we operated at all, we operated in small groups, and it was, you know, up until maybe the last 1,000 or 2,000 years, or maybe a few hundred years, it was you know what? Every man for himself, every person for himself. You needed to work 24/7, 365 days a year to survive, to provide for, you know, whoever was associated with you. It might have been, a spouse. It might have been kids. You were kind of, to a degree, on your own. We didn't have society like we have society. We didn't have food banks. We didn't have, caring neighbors. We didn't have these things. And so really the notion of taking what you have and giving to other people is counterintuitive. Why would you do this when you're on the brink of of destruction yourself? And so they've really sort of looked at this, and there's lots of different theories on this pro-social paradox. Um, and one of them is what they'll call altruistic happiness. In research in psychology and sociology, it's consistently shown that individuals that tend to be generous experience positive emotions, satisfaction, and happiness when they do these things. So we're led to these things by internal forces of psychology and sociology. It's also shown that people who contribute to the world around them build these social bonds, and these social bonds we have are really nothing to be dismissive about it if you stop and think about it. Our lives are put together are stitched together by people that are around us. I am sitting here doing a LinkedIn Live that will be captured, will be part of a podcast. People around the world are seeing it, and I just came from being on somebody else's podcast, and all these things are coming to me because I have created relationships with other people, these social bonds. I've learned to do these things because people have taken the time to show me how to do it. They also show that the notion of this social paradox is closely related to the things we need to fulfill our basic psychological needs, if you will. Um, you know, Giving to other people fulfills our need, our satisfaction, to be relevant, to show we're competent, that we have an autonomy. It increases our well-being, if you will. And so it's all really kind of interconnected, if you will. Why do we give to other people when we really shouldn't? I mean, a lot of animals out there don't. I mean, they certainly have certain primates, and they live in communities, and they're certainly our closest relatives. And you have whales and dolphins that really operate in communities. And I guess you have ants, but a lot of animals don't. And none of the animals certainly do to the extent that we do. And so again, it gets back to the whole notion is why are we generous? Well, we're generous because it it helps us in time. but we're also generous because we're hardwired to be generous, and it creates a positive feedback loop, if you will. Is that when we're generous, um, when we do things for other people, we feel good, and when we feel good, we're in a more prone to do things for other people, and so it just keeps feeding itself and feeding itself and feeding itself. And I tell people, if you're ever feeling down, the thing to do is just to give to somebody else, to do something for you. I'm not saying pull out your wallet and hand them $100 bill, but be encouraging of somebody who has less. And there's always somebody who has less, as underscored by my client's wife, who said, you know what, you have 3 healthy kids. You have so much. And I do. But from an evolutionary perspective, this whole notion of giving, that we have learned, maybe not consciously, maybe it's subconsciously, maybe it's just how it all worked out, that if we contributed to the world around us, that our communities would be stronger. And by our communities being stronger, in essence, it lifted us up. And again, it wasn't necessarily a conscious thing that we thought about, but it was just one of those things where it was kind of baked into our DNA and how we operate. That if we um, if we did these things, that our communities would be better off, and then we would be better off. And we didn't think it through. It's just like, we knew on some level, or we trusted on some level, or we just did these things because that's what the social norms were. Now, obviously, there are cultural and individual differences. There are people out there who have a tremendous propensity for serving. Mother Teresa, we can think of lots of Gandhi, lots of other people. Who really had a propensity to serve others, if you will. And there are people alive today that that fill those roles. And then there are differences between cultures. Some cultures are certainly more generous than other cultures, and I don't really want to get into it. Um, but the bottom line with respect to generosity is that it's really kind of baked into us. And do we need a reason to be generous? Do we, quoting Pat Harder, do we give to get? And if you do, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's the reason that drives you to give, is to get, there's nothing wrong with that. The only problem is that sometimes what you're doing and what you're getting in return are not closely aligned, and so you might become frustrated with it, even though in the background things are happening for you. So it's really kind of a limited view. But if we take that second view of, hey, we get to give, we get to help other people, we just need to trust that it's really working in the background to help us. And if we just kind of adopt that mindset as really the number one reason to be generous, is that, hey, we're blessed enough to be able to be generous. In time, things will come back to us.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.